on Baatein, we have with us product designer and educator Swati Shelar. Swati balances a design studio that jumps across the gap between design and education, keeping children at the center of every project. Having trained as a product designer at NID, she went on to work as a toy designer and primary school teacher before getting an MA in education at the Stanford University. Since then, she has worked in the world of Indian education and EdTech as a curriculum designer and educator and started Jump Design India in 2020. She's playing at being an author these days with a book in progress called Useful Notes on People for children's social-emotional learning. Welcome to Baatein, Swati. We are very excited to have you with us, and without any further ado, let's begin the session. So, to begin with, could you give us an insight into your journey to this intersection of design and education?
Hi. Hi everyone. So I started my design journey right here, so it's really surreal to be back here. And I think to speak about education, I'm going back to my childhood now. So I was like a pretty good student. I liked studying, but I came from a very normal kind of school. And then I went to a little experimental school in 11th and 12th where there was art, and art was a subject, and that was very a liberating experience for me. And then when I came here, I saw how learning could be not so structured and could happen in a very free-flowing way at NID. So all these things started, making me interested in the world of education as well. And so when we were studying product design, there was, there were few projects which came under the scope of design for children, or where we could go and visit schools. Like one of the projects in systems was a project for menstruation. So we chose the topic of menstruation. We tried to teach children about menstruation. We went to schools and we made a video, and that video actually got selected in some film festival also at that time. It was a very basic video, honestly. It was an animated short clip. And so there was always this interest, and I think education has a similarity with industrial design in the sense that both things are playing at scale, right? So you want a product to reach many people, and similarly education, the system is trying to reach many people, whereas learning itself happens in the individual, or it can be a very individualized thing whether you learn or not, but the system of education is quite a scaled thing. So there is some similarity between thinking about products at scale and thinking about education at scale. So somewhere that started aligning in my brain. And then we can talk more about it.
Yeah. So you recently founded the Jump Design India studio. So what led to its making? What was that journey like?
So I started Jump in 2020 around Feb, but I always wanted to start my own thing. I wanted to have a studio or a business of my own where I can run things, and I'd been working in the field of product design and education for like 6-7 years already. And I'd done my master's. Even when I went for my master's, I had this at the back of my mind that I wanted to come back to India, I wanted to have my own studio, I wanted to set this up. So it was always like a dream, and the kind of job I was doing at the time wasn't, I wasn't satisfied, and I was like, now I have to do this. So then I put in my papers and I just started it one day, in 2020.
That's quite interesting. So, Jump Design India is specifically focused for children.
Yeah.
And you just talked about one of the projects that you did initially that was related to menstruation with children.
Yeah.
So, was that the cause how this interest into design for children specifically rooted from?
But even during that time, so I think when I was working on certain projects in product design, one of the things. It was a very unrelated course. I think it was design management, something like that, with Bhavin Kothari. And I had made this blender in the shape of an elephant for kids. And then in my jury, someone was like, "You have a knack for this, making cute things." And I tried to push it aside. I was like, "No, I'm more than that. I'm not just someone who can make cute things or whatever." But then I kind of embraced it. So when I was doing my diploma project, my graduation project as you would call it now, I worked in this company which was making products for visually impaired people, and one of my project was like a reading device for visually impaired people to scan any printed text and it would convert it into braille and all that. And at that time I worked with visually impaired children, and I was really interested in that. It really touched me, like how people can learn things, and humans are so cool and all of that. And so that started the journey. And then I also worked at this place called Magic Crate, which was a subscription box company which made toys for children. So we would pack a lot of different materials in a box, and children would make it at home and play with it, whatever the toy was. Like there were themes and all of that. So so that really got me interested in, because every month we would make 4 activities, and all those 4 activities had to be tested out with children. So we would go to either children's houses or we would go to preschools, and we would ask them to use it and get their feedback. And it was so children are such an honest user group, because they'll either say they like it or they don't like it. There's no ambiguity over there. And plus there are lots of constraints or things to be considered when you design for children, like whether it's safe enough, whether they're going to swallow it, or whether they're going to even relate to it in any way. And there's also a bit of like a playful storytelling element which you can bring to your product. So that was like wonderful. That whole Magic Crate experience was really wonderful. And I think even the people I worked with over there were really supportive when I said that I want to do my master's in something like child development or psychology and all that. So actually my boss was the one who said, why haven't you applied to Stanford or something like that. So then that's when I went forward also in that journey.
Wow, that's very, very exciting. So you just talked about how you had a lot of user testing when it comes to research methodologies with children. So, I mean, children being your stakeholders, it would have been quite challenging. So was it the only way you did your research when it came to children and what you were designing for?
Yeah, I mean, the component of trying it out with children was very important. So that's traditionally what we do in design research also. We go and show children or whoever the user is whatever we are designing, and they give us feedback. But there's also a lot of background research to be done when designing for children, because you have to read papers about how they develop, how we all develop, how we learn things, and like I said, like ergonomics or safety matters when it comes to children. So there's a lot of that kind of secondary research, and numbers also help you when you're designing for children, like the size of things, the shape of things. So there's a lot of different types of research involved in design for children.
Okay, so you earlier talked about your Stanford experience. So how is that different from NID, and were there any major takeaways that you had from just Stanford experience?
Yeah, so Stanford was very different from NID because it was highly structured. There was each quarter we had to choose the kind of courses that we wanted to do, and I went there with the focus of taking more education or psychology related courses than taking design or technology per se courses. So I tried to choose those kind of courses, and there's always something happening on campus, some Nobel laureate, somebody, like it was like too much information overload suddenly. And there were obviously exams and assignments which had to be turned in at the end of every 3 months, and all the courses were happening simultaneously. It's not like 2 weeks of something and then 1 week or something. So all the assignments would pile on to you suddenly at the end of the 3 months. So it was very different, and a lot of maths, a lot of reading and writing of very complex research papers and all of that. So that was tough, honestly. It was very tough to orient myself to that. Before I went there, I had to do a lot of prep, like I had to do GRE and all of that sort of stuff. But actually the getting in part is not that tough, because if any, I mean, all of you got into NID, so the odds of you getting into Stanford are actually higher than getting into NID. So I think also when you go for a master's program, it's like if you have a very specific focus, you would probably have some work experience also in that area. So the number of people applying to a very specific course are also smaller. So that part is not the tough part. The tough part is actually just sticking it out and doing all the work and keeping sane while doing all of that work. Plus it's very isolating, because masters is a program where at least in my experience, a lot of people had other lives, like they were married, they had work, some of them were doing work and studying at the same time. So it wasn't like people were hanging out in class or all of that kind of stuff. That was very isolating, and that and a few of my previous other experiences made me think a lot about mental health and that kind of that zone. So I mean, Stanford is very rigorous, and it made me learn a lot of theoretical stuff which I use today, which is how to even read research or be critical about research numbers, those kind of things. Yeah.
So how have you been using the qualitative and quantitative research in your work today? You just talked about Stanford teaching you that in specific.
Yeah, so Stanford actually is an institution which prides itself upon research, right? So whenever you hear that a Stanford researcher has done something, it gives it some kind of heft. That's because over the years they've been building themselves up as an institute which publishes a lot of papers, which pushes the students to also apply to conferences and to put their work out there in the form of formal written stuff, and also demonstrate their experiments and all of that to the public as well. So in that sense, it was a different kind of approach. Here we are very exploratory, and we don't showcase a lot to the rest of the world. A little more is happening now, but they have a very strong focus of doing that. So even some of the courses that we were doing, at the end of the course, whatever you've done during the course, whether it's a demo or you've done some kind of secondary research even, you put that into a paper and you submit it to a conference. And a lot of the professors are in that conference circuit, and if their name also gets attached to a student's publication, it becomes their publication. So they're all into that research world, so that gave me an exposure of that. And today the kind of work that I get, some of the work is very research focused, like either to survey children or to gather some data about what other literature exists in the world of social-emotional learning, to put that in a report. So that kind of work also has a lot of takers. I mean, this is also a job, like this is a paid job which doesn't really occur to purely a design field person. So, I mean, and the research has the research doesn't need to translate into a product or anything. It's just research for research sake. Like you get more information, gather it, give an opinion or a different context for that research. And especially a lot of research happens in non-Indian context. So if you take some particular ideas and try and show them to Indian children and the teachers, etc. That gives it adds to the knowledge of a certain field, which makes it more applicable to other countries who have the same socio-economic background, that kind of stuff. So yeah, so work also today looks like a lot of research, etc. for me.
Yeah. So talking about social emotional learning, can you tell us what exactly social emotional learning is and how did you find your interest in this particular field?
Yeah. So social emotional learning is a field which focuses on the development of a human being from the angle of like the whole person who feels, who thinks, who has relationships, who is part of a society, rather than only academic achievement, and that was appealing to me. Plus, there's very strong link between having good social emotional learning, like learning about social issues and your context and your emotions, to mental health. So for me, I started thinking about mental health in NID when this is like in my family we had some issues about my sister basically had some issues, and at that time there wasn't a lot of information or resources online or even talk about mental health in India. This was in 2011 or 12. And even for my family to understand what is going on, or to accept that mental health is a real issue, took some time. So in that time I started reading a lot about what it is, to try and educate myself and my family about it. And then when I was at Stanford, I also was experiencing very similar like isolation, and it was a very low phase for me. So I had this personal experience of why it's important also. And then the same thing you can apply to children today, because when you see, and a lot of people now do see that the importance of mental health because of the pandemic as well, because they were isolated at home and they didn't have a lot of connections with the outside world and things like that. So that's basically how I got interested in social emotional learning. And there are also a lot of educational frameworks on SEL now. So whether it's through this what we call CASEL in the US, or there's various the UK, Netherlands, the WHO, UNICEF. All of these things have lot of literature in place for what social emotional learning is, how it helps children, and what we can do to help children using these frameworks. So so that's my main interest.
Okay, so would you say that there has been any change or evolution in social emotional learning in the Indian context, the Indian curriculum, from your perspective?
Yeah, for sure. Even now, so in 2020, the government launched this new education policy, right? So in that, a lot of emphasis is given on the whole holistic development of the child. So in that, specific things about how children should be able to identify their emotions, relationships. All these things are very much in the education policy itself. Plus, a few years back, you may have heard of this happiness curriculum that was developed for Delhi government schools. So they're trying to put that, give that time to formally have that in classes. Before this, when we were in school, we had this thing called moral science, and I think it was the intention was similar, but then it focused a lot on good and bad, ethics, like what a person should be, and cleanliness, honesty, these kind of things, which are value based, but they are not they're not individual focused, or they're not also not backed by just basic science things. Like, so for example, if you look at emotions, or how we talk about emotions in SEL, it's like more about how your brain functions, what are the different areas where emotions come in your brain, or that emotions are a real thing, like it's not, it's a part of your body, or you can feel your stomach tightening or your breath getting shallow when you have a certain emotion. It's not only like you should do this or you should do that. It's more about like the information that comes along with the background information that comes along with things. Yeah.
Okay, so how different does SEL look like for instructors and students? And I mean, is there any specific training that's been given to integrate it into the system?
That is a little lacking right now. Few schools employ counselors, so the school itself develops their curriculum for social-emotional learning. Actually, I would be interested to know if anyone who is like in foundation or something has had SEL instruction in their schools. But yeah, so there is the counselors are obviously trained from their education as in whatever way they've learned psychology. But general like a B.Ed or M.Ed graduate may not have that much exposure to social-emotional learning, but there is a lot of work being done in this field in India. Like, there are at least 20 organizations that I know of working in social-emotional learning. A lot of them target teachers, a few target students themselves, like they build curriculum that can be taught to children. So there's a lot of work happening now in this SEL zone in India, which is great, like, which gives you a lot of hope that there is something good happening. And yeah, so but the difference, yeah, you asked me about the difference between teachers and students. So yeah, like adults also obviously need to know what SEL is, or have an awareness of topics under social and emotional growth. And there is a lot of work to be done in that area right now in India. So and different trainings for teachers and for students, of course. Yeah.
So, considering that every kid has a very specific set of emotional skills, how important would you say personalized learning in SEL would be, or is that even a possibility?
Yeah, so that's that goes back to that question of scale, like, so education is meant to be at scale, and it really helps when people can meet each other and be in a classroom together. And so students need a space where they can come together. So if they come together, then if you're teaching them something, it has to reach all of them. So then you have to kind of design it to reach all of them in an equal way. But yeah, being each individual being so different, what they'll get out of what you're telling them might be very different. So even how we do things at NID is somewhat answering that question, where you give a certain lecture, or you give certain amount of input from the teacher, but then after that students do their own work, and then in that work they're doing what appeals to them, or what they are good at, or whatever they're interested in, and then the teacher can spend a little more time with each student to go deeper with them. So similarly, the way you teach or you expose children to SEL can involve both the things, like having instruction at scale, but also personalizing it for each one based on what they're interested in. If the structure is flexible enough, or if the way the teacher approaches it is flexible enough for that. So I hope that answers that question.
So, I mean, apart from this like keeping it very open-ended to just give one common thing to do and then going personally. Are there any other solutions to make it much more personalized and to understand like all the children better?
Yeah, and so yeah, I was thinking about this, and so now we have things like online education where each child can do things at their own pace, or people are choosing things like being homeschooled, or their parents just don't make them a part of the systems that are there because they don't agree with whatever is happening there, or for whatever reason it's more convenient to them, or that kind of stuff. So these are solutions that go away from the traditional methods of teaching anything. So and I think in the last 2 years a lot of work has been done in online education, and there's interesting things happening over there. But all of these things have challenges because if you think about online education, you know how impersonal it feels, or how disconnected you feel from the rest of the people in that class. Or if you think about homeschooling, it kind of, unless there are a lot of children, like the family has 5 children or whatever, it can kind of isolate the child from the social interactions at a young age, and then when they're actually working with many people or in the field, it might make them, I mean, it kind of disillusions them about the world. So I mean, I'm just saying this out of these things that I've seen, the homeschool children that I've seen, or things like that. So I mean, yeah, there are challenges to the solutions that exist for very personalized learning, but people are trying a lot of things, and yeah, one of the things that might work now that I'm also trying is a book. So that can also be personalized because there's something to work on. It's a workbook, so that kind of thing. So yeah.
So talking a little bit more about mental health in children, how would you draw a line between education for an adaptive human being in the society versus an academic achievement?
Yeah. This is a complex question. Well, you have, so there are many components to this question. You have mental health for children, and you have academic achievement. In the traditional school setting, we have a lot of focus on doing something so that you go ahead, you keep on achieving something, you get rewards when you're in the system, and you kind of, the student kind of conditions themselves to achieving, and then you have different systems where there is scope for exploration, and so like a few things that we just discussed. So mainly I think the world is changing very rapidly, and for children to wrap their head around all the changes that are coming, whether it's online education or whether things like the pandemic that will happen in the future, or political strife that may come, or any kind of new big things, it reaches children much faster these days because of the way our media spreads things. So in that sense, to be adaptable to all these new big things that come becomes a lot more important than to achieve something and like reach some kind of plateau. But at the same time, having a sense of purpose or having a sense of where you want to go in life is important, or is important to a lot of people. So I mean, this is a very complex question that you have asked. But yeah, basically mental health is becoming really important for children, and the more people realize it, and because of the changing nature of our times, the more people realize it, the better it is. And and also to shift from this. I think a lot of parents are also these days thinking about this and not pushing their child to a lot of achievement, whereas in our generations, in our parents' generations, there was a lot of focus on achievement, and especially in India. So yeah, I'm hopeful that the focus will shift from that in the future.
I hope so too. So you've also worked as a curriculum designer, right? So have you faced any challenges being a curriculum designer again in the Indian context?
Yeah, so curriculum design involves like there'll be some kind of thing that the organization wants to teach. This is from setting up amount of time for a certain goal. Like this, in this case, the goal was to get children to be makers or to innovate something. And in each of the sessions, you think of what's the best way to give them the skills or the exposure to reach that goal, which is to be a maker. So in this, we used this design thinking process, but we really simplified the language, as you can see, from that empathize, define, etc. to feel, choose, and all that. And we also had to make it in Hindi, and we also had to make this very democratic. So the last step is to vote on people's projects and to in your classroom choose the best kind of project, because then we were going to display this and all that. So in one of the challenges of curriculum design is to actually educate people about what this thing actually is, what it might look like when you say that I'm going to design a curriculum for you. And then secondly, it's contextualizing it to fit the needs of our government school or our whatever place you're looking at. And even within India, we have so many different kinds of contexts for schooling, right? We have government school, we have a very high-end IB school, which follows a different philosophy. We also have like the generic schools, which children are going for tuitions and for different things. So like and then we have urban, rural, we have hundreds of contexts literally in India, and it's to design something which will work for a particular context is a lot of information gathering, a lot of interviews, trial and error, until you actually get something that works in that context.
You mentioned your book, Useful Notes and People. Can you tell us a little bit about it, and when can we read it?
Yeah, the book is kind of a textbook and a workbook for children from the 5th to 7th standard, and it is based on social-emotional learning, and the framework that we're using is this Indian social-emotional learning framework, which puts different learning objectives in age bands. So like it won't just say for self-awareness, it won't just say understands emotions. It will say at a 10-year-old, at the age 10 what a child should be able to understand, at age 15 what a child should be able to understand. And they've done a little bit of field testing with this framework. So this is a good backbone to have for the book. And yeah, it has a lot of activities. It's illustrated very beautifully by this senior from animation called Ekta. So yeah, this is the book, and it will be like sold to schools, like many schools, and also available in shops hopefully. And right now is a very interesting phase because the writing is done, but we are trying to figure out the publishing and the distribution and the business aspects of it. So yeah, that's going to be a big part of the future.
All the very best for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's all from my side. So we are open for questions from the audience, if any.
So I was just recently going through this secondary research on how play is important for the child development. So I was researching on children from toddlers to 6 years old. So what I found is like lots of our emotional, socio-emotional development is happening over there. So the thing is like nowadays, I mean children are less, they are more focused on academics rather than play and do. So what I feel like nowadays children have, as an adult, so we are lacking kind of empathy compared to the previous century people. We have the less empathy and we are getting offended easily comparing to a previous generation. So the thing is like if these things are right, so our parents are still focused on the academic things. So how we can convince them like so how the play is important, all those things.
I don't know how to convince parents, but yes, you're right. A lot of development happens in the free time or in the play time that children have, and even when you're working as an adult, I think a lot of the creative aspects of things happen when you're not really thinking about it, or when you're giving yourself the time to explore things. So, I mean, I also don't blame parents because they didn't have that kind of exposure when they were younger too, and they see that there's a lot of achievement, there's a lot of benefits to achievement, like getting higher salaries, getting good jobs. So there's a lot of fear about whether that child is going to miss out on that. So, and people use that to their advantage to sell whatever products they want to sell. So, I mean, I don't think the parents are also to blame over there. But when you have a child, maybe you can let them play more, and you can also tell other people about the importance of how it's important to play and be free, and how when you meet other people or when you're just spending time doing nothing, that's when you form bonds. So these kind of, like, if you feel it's important, you go for it.
So I went through this different kind of teaching approach. Like I went through this Montessori classrooms. So they're actually more towards like the children centered, actually the curiosity driven learning. So comparing to that, like so as a human in the 21st century, we need some kind of skills, right? So somewhere it won't align well, like the self-centered learning and the skills required. So how we can fill the gap, like?
That is a good question. So actually we were just discussing this a little while ago about how it's about what the I think it's about what the subject is. So for example, if you want the children or the students to explore more, or to just kind of get an introduction to the topic itself, it's kind of that play method works really well. Whereas if you have a certain goal that you want to follow, and there is a, like for example, now there is a book which I have written, right? So while I was doing the research, it was nice to explore a lot of different things, or while developing the activities, it was nice to play around with the ideas. But then the skill of writing, sitting in one place and writing, that gets developed only if you practice, or you sit there and do the work. So it's kind of, I feel it depends on what the goal is, what the outcome will be. So even in similar things, if you look at what the child is trying to do, maybe using different methods to either to explore or to develop skills, if there's a goal which is clear, it might be helpful to go in that. Like especially if the person knows why they're doing something, that orientation will come.
My question is, so when you think about industry, right, doing something unique and something different from the industrial point of view, where people are focusing more about money and just focusing on mental health, what are the key challenges that you faced, or have you fixed a problem along with it? And what are the tips that you want to give to those fellow designers who wants to go to a different path, right? So what are the challenges that you faced along that journey?
Yeah, actually it's a big asset to have a different path, because for me especially, that's really been beneficial that I have not done traditional industrial design. I've chosen a very specific part of it, which is children, or even social emotional learning for children, because the more deep you go into a topic, or the more different your focus is, the more you can stand out against the crowd, and more people, especially you want to do your own thing, people will approach you for your particular skill set, right? So that really works to my advantage, because and also the field that I'm in right now has a lot of focus. Maybe in the future, I don't know if this field will still have more focus, and maybe I'll have to change a little bit my direction of my path to see what the what's going on in the world and what is important. But for me, it has been a big asset to not follow exactly what everyone else is doing. So, and I think for all designers to find some kind of niche, or to find some kind of style, a voice of your own, if you're a communication designer, it really helps. And that's actually, each person is so different that it's actually going to naturally go towards that if you allow yourself, if you build yourself in that direction.
Hi Swati, thank you so much for having this conversation with us. I wanted to ask, so you mentioned that majority of your research-based education was when you were in Stanford, and product design is what you had taken up here. Now, all of the part of your education that you were exposed to, where you had to really dig into research and material, archives, etc., was probably done in a very different context as opposed to where you're trying to work right now. So basically, my question is, the work that you're doing is for it to be established in a country like India, and Stanford would have given documents and archives that were first world and established in a very different context. Obviously, you have your upbringing here, but the form of education that we follow here is not very research-based, as mentioned in the conversation. So how did you bridge that gap, essentially?
There is a lot of research which comes from India also. Let's not say that there isn't. And actually, even when people had set up like NCRT, or the vision for education long ago was very strong, because people were academics who were setting up the education department and all that, even during independence. So it's not that the base of Indian education is not research focused. It's the scale of India which becomes really challenging, and the variety of India that becomes really challenging, because when you have really great intentions by different people, and they kind of lose steam by the time it reaches the last person in the furthest place. So that is there. But also, when you asked about difference in India and the US or the research contexts, there were not only Americans there, right? Like, there were so many different people from so many different countries, and especially like the mentor who was assigned to me basically at Stanford, he was from Brazil. So there was a very different, so they are also like a developing country with a large population, though the context is very different. So it was a place to meet a lot of different contexts and see how China works, how Brazil works, how African nations work. So there was a lot of understanding of even different countries, not just first world countries and contexts. And we read papers from people in different contexts as well, or we were and also we could focus on our own things, right? So one of the classes was about assessments and designing assessments and things like that, but I took up the Indian CBSE 12 standard or 10 standard papers, and I studied that. So yeah, so that allowed for that also, Indian context also.
So that variety probably helped in not creating a huge gap, as in the divide between research done by an outsider for our country and research done by someone in our country for our country, establishing for the just insane amount of diversity that we have.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi Swati, thank you so much for speaking with us today and answering a lot of the questions in a lot of detail. What I wanted to ask you about is your studio, Jump. I wanted to know in a little more detail about the structure of the studio and the running of it, and what are the kind of services that you provide. I understand curriculum development is one of them, but how do you interact with other organizations?
Yeah, so it's just me right now, and I'll be hiring 3 interns soon, as in they are hired. But there'll be 3 interns joining. It's very new. I'm also figuring out. Some days are like, maybe this studio idea was a bad one, and some days are like, oh, so many projects are coming in. So it's a challenge to set up your own thing and to search for people who want to work with you. Sometimes it's better to let them come to you and not just keep putting out your work and let them come to you. But sometimes you have to tell people, I can do this, I can. So it's a challenge. I haven't figured it out yet. But the kind of projects we do are, so the book is the main, it's like a product. So it will be something that will have its own sales and then feed back into the studio, and then maybe we can make some more toys, games and things like that. So curriculum design is one. It could be anything. So curriculums around maker or sustainable development goals or anything. Then the other is research, like properly just being a part of an organization. And the challenge with education is that projects tend to be long because you need to either see how children are getting something, or you need to spend a lot of time with the research and see what insights are coming out of it. So it's not going to be like 2-week or 1 month projects. Even sometimes it goes to 3 months, 6 months, 9 months is the longest one I've done so far. So yeah, so that's the kind of projects that are coming in right now. Hopefully there'll be more awareness about the fact that children's products are, you can outsource your little bit design element to somebody, or you can get training from somebody. So going into the future, it's going to be like products of our own and services, so that might solve something. But yeah, like I said, I haven't figured it out fully yet.
Okay, thanks. Wishing you the best.
I think that's all of the questions from the audience. So with this, we've come to the end of this very insightful session. And on behalf of the NID community, I'd like to thank you, Swati, for finding some time and giving us a peek into the field of education and mental health. All the best for your upcoming book, and I hope you have a wonderful year ahead. Thank you everyone in the audience for joining in today. Hope to see you guys soon again. Thank you so much.